It's recording.
It's recording.
Godlike powers.
Welcome everyone to Think Again, Faith Again. So grateful to see such a good crowd here of beautiful people. Appreciate all of you for being here. Again, this is our 10th year that I've been doing this, so it's kind of exciting. Very grateful to have Marion there. Melissa and Marion. Wasn't intentional to have two M's, but I guess that's what we got. It's cool. The M&Ms. So that's really wonderful. Let's start with a really cool musical number from Spencer Hinckley. He was kind enough to volunteer after I asked him to play. I've heard him a couple of times, and I was really impressed with his choice of music and his voice and his guitar. I think he's a talented musician, and I appreciate him being here and wanting to do this. And then we'll have an opening prayer by my dear friend Sister Gula. Anyway, we'll go to that point. So I'm going to turn this for Spencer.
So Jay asked me to play something, and I said, what do you, any ideas? He said, well, I don't know.
So I trust you.
Yeah, thank you. And there's an artist I like, David Wilcox, who sings a lot of really good songs. That this one seemed to fit something that I've been thinking about a lot. I think it sort of fits with this group, this book, different voices. The song is called Native Tongue. God knows your native tongue. And I sort of thought, God, something that I've appreciated more recently in my life is God meets us where we're at, back, grammar, and all. Truer words were never spoken. Pick them up when you were young. Maybe woven in a story that goes back to where you're from. Truer words were never spoken, and for an audience of one, where you're healed is where you're broken. God knows your native tongue. God knows your native tongue. Start a bridge with what's behind you. The scattered pieces of your past. Build it out over the chasm to the promised land at last. Start a bridge with what's behind you. God picks up where you've begun. It's where you look is where love finds you. God knows your native tongue. God knows your native tongue. Spoken words in Aramaic, sounds I wouldn't understand. And local ancient died for the people of that land. No little words can hold a candle to the splendor of the sun. Can't explain this world of wonder, shine the same on everyone. But little words. You hold a candle all your own in darkness. It's just the size for us to handle. God knows your native tongue. God knows your native tongue. God knows your native tongue.
Gorgeous, thank you. Thank you so much. Martina?
I just stay right here.
Oh, I'd love you to come up, but it's up to you. Okay, just want to make sure people can hear you.
Our Father in heaven, we thank you for this day. We are grateful for the opportunity to all gather here together and discuss and learn and interact with one another. Please help us to feel the Spirit and the ways that we individually feel it. And we say this in Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. And Janice and Rob Spangler, thank you for hosting us in your lovely home. And Janet, thanks for womaning the Zoom over there. Spencer, that was just, it's gorgeous. I knew you picked something just right. How many have had a chance to read the book we've read? Thank you. Highly recommend it. I'm not done with it, but I have perused it quite a bit and read a number of them. They're really, really good. And I can't wait to hear how you guys found, how you and Kate found all these wonderful writers and thinkers. Again, you can go to the website, my website, ThinkAgain-FaithAgain.live to find the bios of these two and information about the book and some podcasts that have been done with Kate and Melissa particularly. Honored to have Sam here, Kate's husband, and his
Amelia,
two
her
daughters. You want to
eldest,
introduce?
and Persephone, her youngest.
Yeah, thank you.
Her middleest is off partying with a friend.
Oh, I'm just so delighted to have you here and honored that you would come. You know, loved your mother and I just so impressed with you guys. I was so impressed when I asked Sam last December to talk about the grief. So that's still here now. Well, we started a little late, so I don't want to waste any more time. I want this to be a time where everybody else can talk. So I'm going to turn it over to you two. Take it away, and then again, it's meant to be a kind of a conversation. So anytime you want to invite a question or you have a question for these two, then please feel free to ask. This has a history of being a safe place for any questions and any thoughts. We're not a place where we try to rag on the church, but if you have difficulties and challenges, you're welcome to share those. And we can help hold that space and hopefully do as it says in the Book of Mormon and offer you comfort and lift up hands up. All right, thank you.
Okay. Do you want to turn the
I need to turn that. Thank you. That thingamajiggy.
right? I like the light right above my head.
Kind of angelic.
I can land that. I greased it up before I came. So what I'll do is I'll just provide some framing on behalf of me and Kate to talk about the overall book project, what we were trying to do. And then I'll turn the time over to our guest speaker, Marion Bishop, who if you haven't read her essay in the book, it's really cool. Very powerful. I won't ruin the effect. You can just do a better job. So just by way of framing, very briefly, Kate and I put this together because for various reasons, but I'm sure obvious to many people here, it's really hard to get Latter-day Saint women who are scholars to write long, faith-filled, positive correlation passing books about like how much they love being Latter-day Saints. It's not that we don't, but it's just like there's so many structural hurdles often created not only by like, our native religious tradition, but also by academia, also by America, also by just general world patriarchy, also by various other things like teenagers. Sorry, I shouldn't slander
You got Nora
Kate
over
and
there.
I's offspring.
I brought an excellent one tonight.
Right?
She'll take yours on.
Okay, so sorry. Like family pressures, and of course you have the pressures of having parents like us.
Yeah.
So for various reasons, but that's how we came up with this structure, which is the first Maxwell Institute book to be an ensemble production. And I like it because the kind of thought that I've had in my head as I drove up here, which I think is in Kate's new book, Both Things Are True, is that, and also the title of this book, Every Needful Thing, is that our intellectual tradition within Mormonism needs to think a little bit more beyond thinking. We need to talk about things that are beyond words. And your song was so beautiful and moving, and the image of the native tongue is beautiful. And it brings to mind not only like words and vocabulary, but also like our idiom and like the ways that we interact with people, and just like the feelings and the images and the tone of voice you use when you talk to a baby, all of those things are different from just words. And so what I think what Kate was addressing is one of the maladies of the current moment we're in, is that and this is like so ironic, right? Because I'm saying these things with words. So I will be the first person to say that words are important, but also as a cancer patient, I will be the first person to say sometimes words are nothing and actions are everything. So and the actions usually come from people. So what I would like to propose, Every Needful Thing points us towards, is they're saying words are not the only needful things. What are the most offensive, annoying things that come from our faith tradition? They're usually words. It's something that someone says in general conference that feels totally wrong, or it's like something that someone said in church history, a very important, influential person said that it just feels totally wrong. You just like, no, like God did not say that. That was like bad words. But words are not everything. The words are one thing. And I think what this book is trying to get at, including with a really beautiful cover image, which says so much just through the image, is that there are many needful things. And Mormonism is a tradition that at its best and most capacious allows for all of those things. And maybe where we kind of get hung up and where we maybe struggle is where we set too much store by words. So you know how there's that term like the Internet of Things, and that's like a contradistinction to what the internet is, which is Internet of words, right? I think that's basically what it is. So I propose that every needful thing, and possibly also Mormonism's tradition, is an internet of people. And that's what's needful, not just the words. And again, the words can be so hard, but like she again says, ironically, I don't think that words are everything. And that's what I love about Marion's life, and also like idea and about Mormon. So without further ado, I will turn the time over to you. Can you please introduce yourself and provide some of that autobiographical information that was in your essay?
I'd be happy to. You're amazing, and it's just an honor. We did this whole book through the pandemic, mostly like by email, and this is the first time I've met Melissa, and it just is such a pleasure and an honor. Yeah. I wanted to thank Jay and Jana for letting, I'm just gonna step up for just a second for the invitation and for your home. But these are from Melissa for anyway, well-being and
Thanks so much.
just and I can put them somewhere if you'd like to, and out of gratitude for the chance to be included in this amazing book. So
We should say, Melissa, how long have you been battling cancer now?
Oh, I just had my credit card expire. That's my 6th year.
And you have treatment today and you have it tomorrow?
On treatment right now.
Girl.
I'm being treated as we speak in the wonderful
Amazing.
medicine and the great people at Intermountain Healthcare. Thanks, Sam.
Nice, nice. Thank you for this.
We want you to be as healthy as you can for as long as you can. Absolutely. Yeah, the world needs you. Do you want to hold those? Do you want me to set them somewhere for you? How are you
Oh,
doing?
hope it's good.
Okay, good, good. Well, I told the florist, I said they're somebody pretty special, so I just want something pretty. So, my name is Marion Bishop. And also to say thank you for the opportunity to be just in this remarkable book. These women in this book are just crazy smart. They're dazzlingly bright, and they're passionate about 1,000 different things, math and science and history and art and music. And interwoven in all of their stories are these, kind of threads of faith and belief. And some of them are of incredible devotion and others of doubt, but it's all needful. It's all part of the picture. And it's an honor to be included. So my story is my day job. I'm an ER doctor. I live in Logan. I work at a hospital in Cache Valley and I work at a hospital in Brigham City. But before I went to medical school, I didn't go to medical school until I was in my 30s. And it's nice to see Julie here tonight because she knows my former life. Before I went to medical school, I earned a PhD in English and I taught college English for 10 or 11 years. And no, well, the hospital administrators encouraging me to get an MBA, and I'm like, no. And that transition for me from reading and writing and studying language and literature and the humanities, and then moving into kind of the drama and the very visceral and sometimes bloody experience of the emergency room, was in some ways all about human beings, right? Like I'm reading and writing and thinking about them, or I'm kind of rolling up my sleeves and getting busy with them. And that's the continuity for me. But Melissa said, and I also am a single mother. I have a 14-year-old daughter and a 7-year-old son. I didn't become a parent till I was in my 40s. I may talk more about that as time goes on, but they're great kids. What? Well, that was Vernon, my son. So my daughter's over there. Yep. My son came along when I was 48. He both my kids were adopted, but I had a chance to adopt him as a single parent. And when his birth mother approached me, I said, "Oh my goodness, I wish I was 10 years younger and in a really happy marriage. But of course, I will take this baby." And that's how my son, my 7-year-old, my 8-year-old. He oh my gosh, he'd shoot me if I said it was 7. He's 8. He's 8. Anyway, he's at home tonight. Melissa asked me to say a little bit about my essay. The title of my essay is Becoming Mormon. And I meant that in kind of a tongue-in-cheek way. I felt wounded when I learned that I couldn't call myself a Mormon anymore. I understand the rationale, but it was part of my identity growing up. But the essay isn't about becoming a Mormon, like a member of the church. It's about how the example of Mormon in the Book of Mormon influenced me. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how I came to write that essay. And I jotted some notes down because I just knew I was going to forget so many things. So the invitation to write, to contribute to the book came at the very end of 2019 or early in 2020. I got an email from Kate, who I was friendly with years ago when I lived in Boston, and we have a bunch of mutual friends, and I was just happy to be invited. And I knew nothing about COVID or, coronaviruses, and, there were glimmers of this in, other parts of the world, but I thought, oh, great, that's going to be a fun thing to tackle in the early part of 2020. And then COVID kind of landed, and in about October, Kate said to me, we really need a draft of this essay. But I was, that whole time kind of working, in the emergency room, also as a single mother, kind of terrified of bringing the illness home to my children or to my elderly parents. This is before any of us could be vaccinated, and we didn't understand, the 1,000 nuances of the disease, and, even early on how it was spread. So as I contemplated in those first 8 or 9 months of 2020 how to write that essay, I found that I myself thinking that the prompt or the request was to write about how our professional lives influenced our spiritual or religious lives and vice versa. Like, what was that interweaving? And as I thought about it, it just felt impossible to make an argument. There was so much divisiveness in the world, like COVID is real, COVID is not real, and I was just in the thick of, of these loud voices all the time. And And I didn't want to make an argument for what I believed or why I believed it. I didn't want to make an argument about why my doubts were valid. I didn't want to make an argument for how this all seamlessly came together. I just wanted to tell a story. And all of this kind of also came together. Well, and there were lots of stories I could have told. I wrote an essay about something that I believe, and I'll talk to you more about that in a minute, but I could have very easily written an essay about everything I doubt, or about everything at the church, everything about the church that has wounded me. Jennifer Finlayson Fife is a friend of mine. You know, we talk from time to time. You know, I also at one point called her and said, you know, I need 4 or 5 sessions to iron a few things out. And, you know, just because of how I was raised. So there are multiple stories I could have told that could have taken different angles. But in the middle of all that chaos, in those early days of COVID, I wanted to write about something hopeful and something about my religious upbringing that felt real and that I did believe. Some of this is, I think what I ended up writing was influenced also in part by the fact that my aging parents are very devoted to the church. They don't share my questions. They don't, the way they believe is different from how I have come to believe. And I wanted to leave something for them kind of as an act of gratitude and what was good for me about how I came up and how it influenced me. And then I also was, especially in those early days of COVID, like completely preoccupied with like, how did I get myself here? Right? Like, how did this possibly happen that, you know, at 31, I left one perfectly good career and trained in another field. And now I'm in the middle of this mess. Like, I just, it was hard for me to completely understand. And each of those steps had felt very guided at the time, but it was another thing to contemplate them in retrospect in the middle of this kind of big historic moment. And then some of all those thoughts kind of coalesced around this figure of Mormon in the Book of Mormon. I taught gospel doctrine for 6 years in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I've taught it for since 2009-14 in my ward in Logan, Utah. I'm a once or twice a month church attender, mostly because the rest of the time I'm in the emergency room. But so I taught the Book of Mormon and the story of Mormon, you know, however many times. And every time we get to the story of Mormon, and he's this kind of like soldier scholar, he's like this Indiana Jones figure, you know, he's like a brainiac guy, you know, condensing all this scripture. You know, whether he was real and a prophet or whether he's just someone that's given to us to help us imagine, I'll leave that to all of you. But he's a fascinating character, and he also like picks up the sword and he leads, and he's like think and do in a way that's really appealing to me, partly because of how I grew up. And at some point, every time that we teach this lesson, you know, we're all, you know, thinking about, you know, who he was and this figure, and I've made the same joke, you know, every 4 years, you know, on that, you know, 21-year cycle or whatever. I say, if I found a man like that, I would marry him. and everybody laughs, but there's just something so compelling about, you know, that story. And so I was thinking about him, and then the final piece that came together, and this is what Melissa was asking, is that I really have come in the last few years to look at those final verses in the Book of Moroni, chapter 10, about, you know, how do you get a testimony? You know, I had the 4 years of seminary. I went to institute and college. You know, I knelt down and said, you know, please help me to know what's true and what's not, and here's what I'd like to believe, and is it real? And I've done all those things, and I've had some powerful experiences. But as I move further into my own life, and as I mix all that belief and devotion with doubt and with real life lived experience, a lot of it in the emergency room, I've come to read that scripture in a really different way, which is to say, you know, it says, you know, the truth of these things will be made manifest unto you. And I always thought, okay, manifest as in a spiritual experience. But I've come to think as I'm older that they are made manifest through us by who we become and by what we do. You know, that kind of pragmatic, like by their deeds ye shall know them kind of deal. Oh, God bless you, Melissa. There we go. Anyway, you know, by their deeds that you shall know them. And what did my kind of indoctrination and immersion in all of these stories throughout my childhood and young adulthood create in me? Like what had that left me with? And that's when I started thinking, well, you know, I kind of turned into, you know, a scholar, and then I didn't turn into a soldier, but I kind of turned into somebody who like got into the mess of it in a way that I deeply admired about Mormon. And so that's what I wrote about. And here I might I'll just read. And I, like I said, they're smarter essays than mine, but I just wanted to tell a story, and Melissa, you can probably tell me where it is. Here we go. I'll read kind of the first paragraph and then the last. It says, I became a physician because of Mormon, not the Book of Mormon or Mormons, but Mormon, the military Nephite, the Nephite military leader, prophet, and scholar who led armies in battle while compiling the entire historical record of his people into a book of scripture still read today. That guy. He's the reason I went to medical school. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Mormon is the reason I first earned a PhD in English too. And then I talk about how those stories just kind of, they just saturated my childhood. And then as I get to the end of it, I say, I talk about, well, there are a couple of glosses I might make. Oh, yeah. I say, but I've also come to know the sacredness of the book in the way following Mormon's words and example has been manifest in me and through me. I'm proud of my accomplishments, but know that much of my life would have been impossible without what the power of the Holy Ghost helped me create. And then at the end, I just said, I hope to be worthy of the next transformation and the next way that following Mormon's words might be made manifest in me. So there was a true story I could tell about everything I doubted about the church. There was a true story I could tell about every way that it had wounded me and how I spent, especially my 20s and early 30s recovering. There was a true story I could tell about how I was situated in all that complex of faith and doubt now. But there was also a true story about how I got made and the threads of this, like these Mormon stories that were layered on and how they kind of inspired me and offered a template to me for my own life. And in the middle of all the chaos of COVID, that's the story I was really grateful to have the opportunity to tell. That's the end. Anyway, I could talk more or say other things, but that's kind of what I think Melissa asked me to share. So
Let's open it up for Q&A.
Well, one quick question. How did you find all these people? I mean, from India and Africa, just everywhere. Some Native Americans, indigenous peoples.
Well,
Where did you find all these women?
was we went and got a bunch of binders. No, some of it was through just our personal network. So Kate knew about Marion's work. She's like, yeah, there's this lady who like got a PhD in English, and then she went to medical school and she's a doctor. And I was just like, it's like so much school. And I was like, oh, you must be really smart and have a really long attention span.
it's very short. You know, it lasts about 10 years.
So some of it was through personal networks, and then some of it was through the global histories work that we're doing, the church history department. That's how we found Nigerian
Talk
Dutch.
about that more. Where'd you go?
So if you go into your gospel library app on your phone and you go to the church history section, you'll find the global histories, and you won't have heard about them because they're not complete yet. It's like you don't dedicate a temple before all the drywall is on and the painting is done and the expensive chandeliers installed. So we have almost finished. So so our version of the expensive chandelier is complying with the church's IP regulations, which are onerous. So once we get the chandelier installed, then we'll have a big launch party and you can all come in and like Hosanna the local histories. But even before then, you can actually tour the sacred temple, which is the global history. And I mean that actually, not tongue in cheek. The stories are sacred and they're really cool because they represent the actual experiences of Latter-day Saints, not the Utah experiences of the Latter-day Saints, but the actual experiences of the actual Latter-day Saints. And if you look, you can find lots of 500 word or less stories, which you can read in their entirety from the pulpit or in a lesson or in a family home evening shtick. They're really great. So that's how we found some people like the Nigerian judge Isohe Ikonomon, who's so cool. If you like Google her, you'll find videos of her being feted as this like awesome, well-known Nigerian judge. And she's wearing this long white wig, and there's like soldiers and trumpeters playing around her. It's like so cool. And then we learned about some people through just other networks, Latter-day Saint networks, like the Robo del Sur Foundation. That's how we found Anna Maria Gutierrez Valdivia, who is now the vice governor of Arequipa in Peru, which is amazing. And then that's how we also found like Noemi Lugomirski, who's like a mathematician, and if you haven't read her essay, it's like
She's got
And
math in there. She's got math in there. She's
and
got
like
algebra.
any essay you've ever read in any Maxwell Institute publication ever. So Kate and I both like kind of like exchanged like this long look, and we looked at her essay, we're like, wow, this is like different from how we think. But it's cool, right? It's like, I was like, wow, she's so smart, she's using formulas, and like letters, but there's only one letter, you know, it's cool. So, yeah, so some of it we were found through networks, and then we did do just like some straight up like internet searches and just contacted people out of it. So. And we wish that we could have more hard scientists, like we tried to get someone who was an engineer or a computer scientist. But I frankly think those people like are making too much money to like contribute to an academic book. We all know it. And like I was saying, anyway, I won't say that. But yeah, anyway, so that's how we found the people.
It's a beautiful collection. It really is.
And like what I said with the internet of people, I just think it's so cool. I think it's like a really great way to capture Mormons, because it's not just like no one's like listing doctrines that they believe in, right? Everyone's like telling about their lives, which are so interesting and like smart. And I was thinking like, you know, sometimes like the official church rhetoric, like it sounds terrible, but then like the Latter-day Saints are like among the best people that I know. Then I was like, wait a second, Melissa, you're not a very social person, you don't know that many people. Yeah, from my own experience. So that's why I think that's what's so valuable about the book, and that's why I read it to my daughter every night until we read the whole thing, because it to me it encapsulates my vision of the gospel, which in sometimes and in some women like contradicts itself, or in some scholars like their approaches contradict my own approach, but like the whole thing all together like encapsulates my vision of the gospel, every needful thing.
So, along that theme, what would you say to women or men who don't feel like they're on that intellectual scholar level that this has to offer them, that they might feel intimidated by whether it had been men or women writing this?
Well, that's what's so cool about it too, is it's like nothing's intimidated about it. Like Marion's talking about how she's reading the Book of Mormon at breakfast and like galloping around on horseback with her brothers,
Yeah.
like around the Snake River. And Valerie Hudson, like the celebrated political scientist, is talking about how she's like running in boots with like mercenaries from Rhodesia and fixing army trucks. So like these are not hoity-toity
Yeah, that
elevated
kind of scholars in the ivory tower.
essays. No, you're like super accessible. And
That's what I found too.
even Noemi, the mathematician, she like makes it really simple.
Yeah.
And then and she talks about how like she was trying to work through this really difficult math problem for her thesis. And like my husband was a math major at BYU. And it's just like I can never be a math major. And it's terrifying because you might not find the right answer. Like you could look at the problem for like years and like not find the answer. That's crazy. Like historians never do that. We can always find something and then say something about it. But like math majors, like they're stuck with truth, and like they can only like say if it works. So like anyway, so Noemi was struggling with this like difficult proof for her master's thesis in math. Again, speaking about long attention spans. And she said she went to serve in the I think the Buenos Aires temple with her parents, and then she went out. She finished a little sooner than her parents. She was waiting outside for them, and just as she was sitting outside the temple waiting for her parents, she pulled out her notebook and she took another crack at her proof, and she like figured it out. And she's and she says in the essay much better than what I'm paraphrasing now, but like, she just thinks like the inspiration, the light, the clarity that she got in the temple through that service, like just kind of prepared her mind to like see see the answer to this difficult problem. And so that's like super accessible. So
Yeah.
everyone should be able to read this.
Well, and the idea that a lot of them have, that they're following their intuition or the Holy Ghost, or just kind of moving along as far as you can barely see, right? And then the next thing opens up, and I love that. I think that's super valuable.
Some great examples of that in the book.
Yeah, there is. There's. I think you're.
Thank you.
Questions? Oh, come on, I don't want to dominate this. Hi, good to see you again.
Thank you. I hope this isn't out of line, but I'd be interested to hear Melissa's story and the background.
Is that your mommy?
No. Experience. Were you always raised in the LDS church?
Oh, yeah, so I'm not, I
Can you
didn't
repeat
have
that?
a.
Repeat the question.
So you
that-
just asked about, like so Marion told a little bit about her upbringing, and she just asked me about mine, so, I wish I could have like grown up writing verses, that sounds.
Now, you do have a book that covers it, basically, right? Your book, doesn't it?
Oh, yes, I
Yeah.
did.
Name the book?
It's called Crossings, and when I first got diagnosed, I had this like panic attack, and I thought that I would die within the year, so I threw together this really fast book. Actually, I should stop talking about the production process. But anyways, I grew up in California. I grew up in mostly the same ward my whole life, the Costa Mesa First Ward. And except for 2 years when my husband was working for CFS, which was the firm that was affected by Mark Hoffman's bombing. So thanks to Mark Hoffman, I moved back to Costa Mesa and continued my upbringing in the Costa Mesa First Ward. So my mom and my dad met at BYU in the Asian ward. Isn't that weird? It's like an Asian ward at BYU. I think we have met her. Other kinds of wards there, like the black ward at BYU. Like there's an Asian ward. It's like still
Just want to put
exists.
the
still.
too, at least. there
Oh,
was.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it probably says more about Asians than it does about. But they met in the Asian ward at the, no, they didn't meet in the Asian ward. They were later in the Asian ward, but they met because, again, this says a lot about Asians. Because my father went through the directory at BYU and he called every girl who had an Asian name.
That's great.
Where he subjected her to some sort of test. And obviously he didn't like go very far with this approach. And then one day he saw a woman walking on campus who was Asian, but he hadn't taken her out yet. So then he followed her to the house. And later got permission to get her phone number and then asked her out on a date where he took her to the Provo River, his favorite spot, where she thought she was going to be murdered. Dropped into the river. But then she later met his sister, my aunt, who was living with him, and she thought that the sister was okay, and so she gave him like one more chance for a second date. So I grew up in a Latter-day Saint ward, and Costa Mesa, Orange County is like a really diverse place. So yeah, so I didn't feel any of those kinds of like racial tensions within our wards or stakes really, because there were a bunch of Asians and a lot of people of color and just running around Orange County. I did feel like I remember going to my the first counselor in Bishopbrick right before I went for a scholarship interview at BYU, and I said, do we believe in evolution? And he handed me Joseph Fielding Smith's Doctrines of Salvation. Which says like, no, we do not. And if you do, like, you don't believe in Jesus. So I was like, oh, okay. So I took that book with me to my scholarship interviews. And here I was hanging out the Days Inn or Motel 8 or whatever it is now, with like these really smart people who have been chosen because they were good at science. And I said, ta-da, what do you think about this book? And everyone's just like, I don't know. And then I was lucky enough to meet with Bill Bradshaw, who's a BYU biology professor, and he's like, oh, it's fine, you know, it's a misunderstanding. And like, that was like kind of my first initiation into the trouble of words. Right? But my whole upbringing with the Costa Mesa first word was like my initiation into the heaven of people, even though there were like serious problems there too, but like you said, but yeah, like. So that was I had a very Mormon upbringing, actually. Even though I usually get mistaken for the Buddhist, like interfaith.
Do you
I
have,
wonder why.
It's actually good, it's like cover, it's like.
Do you have a brother, Ben?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, he was a student of mine at BYU, and I went to his wedding, and I'm sure I met you
Oh,
there.
yeah.
And then your other brother, your older brother.
You have no ability.
Oh, your uncle, sorry.
Oh, right,
Your uncle.
yeah, I didn't get Charles in my.
Sorry. I don't remember
And then-
my own brother.
Melee, a cousin, and she was a student too.
Hmm. Wow.
Oh, here's, yes.
I have kind of a loaded question, so.
Yeah,
My phone. I've been thinking a lot about finding a balance with faith. Because I'm not very good at finding balances with most things, it feels like. And I've heard, because I've been struggling with motivation lately, I've heard some people say that there's a difference between motivation and discipline. And that there's also. No, I just deleted it. That there's also, like, in my psychology textbook I was reading about nature versus nurture and these different balances, and I don't know, the juxtaposition. And then I was thinking, because my mom loved gardening a lot, and I think there's also a primary song about like faith is a little seed or something. And so I was thinking, I like comparing faith to a seed. And again, with the balance, I was trying to figure out, so with plants, they need the enough water, enough sunlight, they need the right space, and they also need someone who watches over them and cares for them. And there's some studies, I don't know if they're actually based in truth, but that say that plants grow more when you talk to them or something. I don't know. So I was thinking, how do you know if you're watering the right plants, and what makes it worth it before they actually bloom? Because there's another, going all over the place, but there's, and what was the quote, sometimes we live in the light, sometimes we live in the memory of the light.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
I don't know what that's from, but
that was Hubie Brown was my dad's grandpa. And when my mom was gonna marry my dad, he took her aside and said, you know, Diane, sometimes you live in the light, sometimes you live in the memory of the light.
like that. So I was thinking, relating that to the plants and also to the balance. My question is, if we can't see progress right away, like if we're watering this plant and talking to it and we're not sure if the seed is dead or not, is it better to wait for it to sprout, or to live in the memory, or the whatever the opposite of
Prospect.
the prospect of the light, and to pretend that it's there, or plan for it when it will be there? Or do we just like look outside of our garden or the pot and look for other things to grow? I mean, so my question is, with faith, is it better if you're not seeing progress? Is it better to wait for something to happen and to keep doing what you're doing, or is it better to
Move
just
on.
move on, or imagine that you feel it? I don't know, or look somewhere else entirely. That's my question.
Okay, well, I love your question because it has so many plant related notes. And I know your mom's a great gardener, and she did like flowers. And so she like did things that like looked beautiful. And I specialize in like attacking things like that. So I'm like an anti-invasive species. And I'm like, there's a wetland in front of our house. I make my children go out and attack the Scotch thistle. So I think I understand your question. I'm not sure if it's exactly the same way that you're asking, but maybe for me, it's like, you're like, you just wonder, like, is this like a path of faith? Because there's different paths, right? That like will work out for me, or is it like foolish to go along this path when I don't belong here? And I might never get to where the pastor is going to lead me, in which case I should have just checked out and done this other thing, chosen this other like approach. And here I'm not talking like membership or not membership in the church. I'm just talking about like a faith approach. That's a really hard question because none of us know the future. But I think maybe another way to think about, like, like Alma says that faith is like a seed, and the song says faith is like a seed, and planted it will grow. But what Jesus said is that, and Jacob said, is that faith bears fruits. So at this point in your life, you probably don't just have seeds, you probably also have fruits. And I think it was Jesus who said that, like, by our fruits, we know whether we're being Jesus's disciples, or by our fruits, we just know what's good. Is it like, are they thistles or are they fruits? And so I think maybe we already have some fruits, but like maybe seeds have already borne fruit in our lives, and so we don't have to just like remember a time when we had faith. We can just look at our actual life and the actual person we've actually become, and like think about those fruits in our lives. And yeah, I guess we'll start there because I know Marion has something really smart to say.
Yeah, Melissa's lovely. That's such a heartfelt question, and you took me back to being, 15 to 20, and also like how I felt yesterday for a while, right? Like I think some of that's part of the human experience. And I think some of it has to do, like, I could describe the last 30 years as kind of a long road to kind of gaining confidence in how I see and function in the world. And each new challenge, I come up short and I have to gain more confidence, so it's a process. But two things for me, and good grief, everyone is different, but it's almost impossible for me to do anything compulsively. I can't diet compulsively. I couldn't study for medical school compulsively. I can't spend time with my children compulsively. I can't, do church service compulsively. I have to do it out of joy. I have to do it out of what makes me happy. And the things that don't, I kind of don't worry about. And I, at least for me, like there's a way to live where you kind of chalk up the demerits at the end of every day. Well, I messed up at this and I should have made that decision, and that was a bad move. And sometimes that's important because I've done some stupid stuff. But day to day, I think it's more important if you focus on what's beautiful to you and how can I grow just a little bit of it today, and where does that take me in terms of what I understand about beauty tomorrow, and where does that take me about what I'm curious about next. Like over time, like that beauty and the curiosity kind of crowds out all the nonsense, and you end up kind of creating a life. Anyway, that
was gorgeous.
That's I was raised, I adore my parents, and this essay in an act of an expression of gratitude to them. But I was a child of correlation in the 1980s, like personal progress, make some goals, make some sub goals, make some sub goals, and cross them all off. And nothing is sure to drive motivation and a spirit from me than that. And for some people it works. For some people it works beautifully. But I'm the healthiest when I, don't worry about what I eat and just trying to remember to, that eating vegetables gives me pleasure. Like that salad was the best thing I've eaten in 10 days. Why did I not eat one for the last 10 days? Right. And and similarly, like this book, like there's this idea in this book that like, I'm on fire. Like, what does that make me want to read next? And then just slowly it builds, or like, I took a walk this way and, I noticed that tree. Where can I find more of them? Where might I like to walk tomorrow where I can see more of that tree? Like, and like, I think there's a kernel of goodness in all of us. And I think the trick is to call it out, less to quash the badness and to call out the goodness and what happens if we nurture that. And I think I have the most success when the posture that I take towards myself is one of compassion, one of saying, life is really hard and no wonder you're discouraged. How could you not be? And I think you can get yourself out of this. What do you want to do next? How do you see your way out? Rather than kind of the judgment and the compulsivity of the well-intentioned way I was raised. No one was trying to, co-opt me or put me in therapy, or they were doing their best, but some of those things happened. So
I have a thought about motivation and discipline. So so in the wetlands across from our house, there's these invasive Phragmites, and they're just taking over. They're like cancer, actually, which is probably why I have so much satisfaction in whacking them down.
Yeah.
For my early birthday present, I got myself a battery-powered weed whacker. I just love it so much. But last year, I did not have a schedule for killing the Phragmites and the invasive species. And we remembered to go out a couple of times, and that just got really hot. And we didn't want to, so we didn't have motivation. We didn't do it. And then this year, I made a schedule, and I made other people show up that helped me with this schedule. And we've been like a lot more successful in quelling the weeds, because we like made a plan and then we like forced ourselves to stick to the plan. I think that's kind of discipline-esque. But underlying both of those, which is where I want to bring in your mother again, motivation, discipline. Sometimes we have one, sometimes we have the other. But underlying both of those, like, I think God gives us deep grace. And I hope, who's on this call? I hope none of my bosses are on this call. During the pandemic, your mother was my boss. And for various reasons, it was like a traumatic time. My kids were at home studying. Everything was like horrible, and we couldn't access our sources. I was extremely unproductive during like those intense moments of the pandemic. And your mom was so nice to me. She didn't say anything. And like later, after the pandemic, I had switched different managers. I like kind of sidled up her and I was like, "Hey, Kate, how come you were so nice to me during the pandemic? Like, wasn't producing any work." And she's like, "Oh, I just could tell that you were having a really hard time." And I was like, "Oh, you're so nice." But like, that's like, to me, like great leadership is like, you just, well, or being really nice to a lazy employee. I don't know. But yeah, but that was so kind of her. I think God gives us that same grace, whether we have motivation in one moment or discipline in the other. Like either way, God like knows where we are.
I might have two more sentences. Like, to me, the word I like better than discipline is order. Like, if I organize my life a little bit, there's so many moments like to find beauty and so many things to be curious about. But if I don't, get up at a certain time, or if I don't have like something in mind for the day, then it all kind of falls apart. So yeah, so all kinds of freedom and creativity and curiosity and fascinating things come up with, at least for me, within just kind of a gentle framework. I do best if I get up by a certain time and take a walk in the morning, and anyway.
Thank you.
Beautiful question.
Can I add something? I'm on Zoom, but I don't know if people can hear me or not.
Oh, that Emily Bates?
It is Emily Bates. Yeah. Hello.
You should turn it around so she can see the people.
I do like seeing you too, though. But I'm assuming from that question that it must be one of Kate's daughters that asked it. Is that right?
Yeah, it was Persephone, her youngest.
Okay, wonderful. I love your question, and identify with it very strongly. And I think sometimes that comes when we see that not all of the fruits are necessarily good, right? And maybe that's what you're talking about, like some of the fruits and some of the seeds that grow, some of the seeds grow, right? We have faith in a lot of things that are part of the church and I'll say part of the church, because I think all of the seeds that are actually part of the gospel do grow. But there are parts that are part of the church that don't grow that well or grow into weeds, maybe that that sometimes hurt, right? And that sometimes, like, at least in my case, the patriarchy is hard for me. And there are aspects of that have hurt me. And I'm still part of the church and I still identify as a member. And sometimes I have that exact same question, like, why am I doing this when there are parts of it that have hurt me? But I also identify with what Melissa and Marion said, that there are so many parts that are beautiful. I have eaten a peach that came from the gospel, you know, the most delicious fruit. I have eaten a mango that came from the gospel, but I've experienced the thistles too. And I don't think having some of the bad things poisons the whole. And so I have thought, you know, where else would I turn, Lord? Where else would I find the good fruit? You know, so you know, those thistles might even still come from the highest part of the church, right? But those people that are running it are people, and so sometimes it takes a while for the good part, for it to weed out the thistles, like Melissa was talking about, right? But everyone, I think, has very good intentions, and God's talking with everyone, you know, that's leading and has a calling. And our own perspectives are just limited by our own experience, right? And so I think the more that we can participate and share our experience, the more it can become the fullness of the gospel. The more that we can listen to the revelations of all of the people who are listening to God's voice, the more it will be the fullness of the gospel. And I think that's one of the values of this book, is that oftentimes we don't hear the revelations and the experience of women in our church, because there's not a forum for women to speak as much, that's amplified anyway. And so one of the beautiful things that both your mom and Melissa did was give a voice to a variety of women, and I'm one of them, and I really appreciate that they included me, even though, you know, my faith is imperfect. Melissa and Kate are both heroes of mine. Sorry to cry, but and so it was really an honor to contribute. And I guess that's all I've got to say.
Yeah. Well, now that we know that you're on the call, Emily, you're going to be on the hook for answering some of these questions. You shouldn't have exposed yourself like exploit you.
I couldn't help talking on that one, because I just felt like, oh, that is the question I ask myself almost daily. Maybe not daily, but monthly.
Mom, don't.
Yeah, and my little boy's here. He's supposed to be in bed, but he keeps saying, "Oh, there's our friend Melissa."
Oh.
We pray for you all the time, right? Yeah, we do.
Sam, how do I pin that back?
Sorry, I freaked Jay out.
No, I just need you to.
He's part of
I
the
don't see
chicken
it.
patriarchy, apparently.
Oh, there it is. I scrolled over, I didn't see it.
I'm just being flip. I think you just click
Yeah.
pin, yeah.
Yeah, I was just couldn't find the pin. I love that you did that though, because that was just a beautiful. So like,
Can I add to these comments as well?
speak loud.
Okay, I'll speak loud. I was just thinking about, I think we all have these questions at least once in our lives. It's such a good question. And I was thinking about, okay, the things that I struggle with, like, why do I still go to church? Because I still do. I teach the primary. Told the missionaries the other day, because I knew they were looking at me. He's not a member. I had to teach them. But I was thinking about my husband's words came to me because of some of the things I struggle with. He said, don't worry about those things. Worry about like the small things that you do know that you believe in. And I think everything grows from there. For me, knowing how I hear God, and I'm going to throw Heavenly Mother in there because she's
Thank
been
you.
a big inspiration for me lately. It's not in church. It's in the mountains. It's in the trees. It's in the birds. So that's like the most important thing for me, is knowing how I hear. It's gonna be different. There's people who open the scripture and the first page, there it is. For me, I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I admire your stories about knowing like Mormon, and I just thought, dang it, I should probably read the Book of Mormon again. Like, I have no idea. But figuring that out, because when you know discernment, when you know how to hear what's right or wrong, when you learn to trust your intuition, yes, God is there to guide us, but your gut's gonna lead you the right way every single time. When you learn how to listen to that, you'll find all the pieces. You'll find how to water the seed. You'll find where the tree is right. And life will just take you. I think we make things complicated. Life will always take you to where you need to go.
Thanks, Martina. Jen.
And I'll add one little thing to that. Because I loved what you said about sometimes we live in the light and sometimes we live in the memory of the light. And I actually think for most lives, it's mostly the memory. And so if you're feeling like you're in the dark a lot, you're not alone. And I see it more like we're walking down a dark path at night, and every once in a while we get a lightning bolt. It illuminates things for a minute. And then we just kind of have to trust ourselves to put one foot in front of the other. Because sometimes we imagine that faith is just about belief, but it's about more than that. It's about trust. It's about the fruits. It's about love. It's about following what inspires us, So don't think you're doing it wrong if you're mostly in the dark, because that's most of us most of the time.
Well said. Yes.
I'm a gardener, so I was thinking about literal gardening, literal seeds and literal plants that grow from seeds. And like you said, some bloom and do well. And sometimes they need a different spot to do well. And they can be just as beautiful, or they're more beautiful somewhere else. But also, I also noticed that sometimes it can be fine where it's at if I add a different plant next to it that maybe shades it or whatever. It doesn't take as much water or whatever. So that was my little analogy symbolism there.
I love that. You can follow her on Facebook and see her. Yes, what do we got back there? Hey, Jeff.
Good. Melissa, I just wonder.
Speak loud.
My name is Doug Christensen. It seems like your project and your work kind of places you in the center of representation. Like it seems like part of the conception of the book is about women having a voice, and I'm just wondering like what you've learned from kind of after writing it about women in the church and maybe you talked about that, I think maybe you already talked about this kind of part of the project, but I'm just interested in sort of how you're viewing, you know, women in the church and what you're seeing out on the horizon for helping the church make space for being the feminine voice.
So the question is, thank you very much. How do we see representation and kind of issues of diversity within the global church? One thing that surprised Kate and I think, as we were putting these essays together, which is always a hazard of an edited volume, like, wow, these essays are really different. Like, sometimes they outright contradict each other. So like Emily Bates, who's on the call now, actually, like said one thing about miraculous healing, and Elizabeth Hammond said the exact like opposite thing. And we're like, oh, what do we do with this? Let's put them side by side really close, so they can like contradict each other like more comfortably. So and you know, I think the perspective also, you know, expressed by Isohe Ikponumwen, who's a Nigerian judge, is way more conservative, you know, with regard to gender and probably other social issues than me or Kate. But like, clearly who's like the cooler person? Clearly her. Who's more feminist? Like, clearly her. She's this, you know, judge in Nigeria who is known for facing down and like corrupt officials and refusing to engage in their nefarious plots. Like, she's clearly cooler. She's clearly more feminist. You know, even though some of the language that she said would like signal, you know, to people who again were looking only at words, that she was not. That's so clearly wrong when you know. So I think what the book does is it encapsulates the kind of uncomfortable reality of the church, which is that everyone is involved. Not everyone. It's actually just a small sampling, right? But it shows like the potential difficulty if you try to build Zion with all these people who totally don't share each other's values in very fundamental ways, and who really different like experiences and perspectives. That's a huge problem if you think that that Zion should represent the values of a North American college educated
White man.
person. You know, but if we think about it, it probably means that we have to kind of give on some of our values. It probably means we have to give on some of our perspectives and experiences. It probably means that like our wish list for like how the church should be is probably like 85% wrong. But what does that mean? You know? And that's why I think the solution is the Internet of Things and not the Internet of Words, because words can kind of contradict each other in nearly mathematical, like fundamentally contradictory ways. But people, there's always like a give with people, right? I was just hanging out today with this crazy, this is being recorded. I was just hanging out with a treasured member of my ward, who I used to think was crazy, who today identified herself as crazy. So it's fine. A self-identified crazy lady, crazy grandma, who I thought pretty soon in my entry to the ward was like a person I would never hang out with, who has like come over and like been such a wonderful person in my family's life, my kids' life, and who like gave me just so much spiritual strength today. That's like the Internet of people. What do you think about the diversity of both perspectives?
Well, I mean, like the questions about diversity and gender identity and LGBTQ stuff, like, and you know, my role as a woman raising a crazy smart daughter, like that's the stuff that keeps me up at night, right? And I don't have answers for that, but it felt awfully good to be part of a collection of such a diverse group of women, you know, kind of talking about their lives and talking about what they were doing. And as I was reading through the book, it reminded me, one of the people who was on my dissertation committee at NYU years ago died during COVID. He lived in New York, and he died in early April of COVID. And one of the last conversations that I had with him, his name was Gordon Cradle, and he was this remarkable teacher of writing and scholar of rhetoric. And one of the last conversations I had with him, probably in 2018, he was caring for his wife who had dementia. And he was concerned about like the election of Donald Trump and all the things. And we just were talking from time to time. I would talk with him on the phone once every few years. And anyway, somehow we got back in touch. And you know, he said to me, he's like, Marion, like, you need to speak up. You need to write. You need, and I was like, what? And because I'm kind of in the slog of raising children, and then he said something that was kind of funny. Like, I thought he was going to tell me how special I was, right? And he didn't. He said, that's because we need a whole chorus of people saying all kinds of contradictory but loud things. You need to be part of the chorus. And that's what I felt like with this book. Like, it's not one voice that changes the world. Sometimes people will coalesce around a really powerful one, but it's a multitude of voices, you know, attacking maybe the same issue from 1,000 different ways and 1,000 different viewpoints, which kind of goes to, you know, another one of kind of my core beliefs. In my ward, you know, I don't go to very many people who vote for the people I do, or see the world the same way I do, or, you know, have read feminist theory, or, you know, some of the things that inform my way of seeing things. And I am enriched by the way they see the world. And I think that the way I interrogate the way they see the world makes them better too. And I think that there's something magical about the way, you know, Nora's dad, my ex-husband, grew up in a Catholic community in a little town in upstate New York. I mean, a moderate-sized town in upstate New York, where, you know, all the he grew up in a Slovak family. All the Slovaks went to a Catholic parish where on certain high holidays, you know, they said mass in the native language. All the Poles went somewhere else. All the Italians went somewhere else. So you went to church with people who are like you. I think part of the magic when it works, and the, you know, the Internet of Things or the Internet of People, is that we have to confront people who don't see things like we do. And how might I enlist, you know, how might I enlist somebody with whom I have a long list of things that not in common, but, you know, to work with me on something that we both cherish. Like, I think that kind of makes us better people, and maybe even holy.
I love it.
So this question ties in with what you just been saying. And it's got two parts. One is kind of personalizing things for all of us who all have a story and need to say it out loud. And also I've been thinking about interviewing Latino immigrants, and so they can think about their own stories. So my question is, just with your global histories and this book, do you have some prompts that can evoke honest reflection and I don't know, help us know what to put out there if we were going to write it ourselves or to other people, or anyway?
That's a really great question. We are trying to think of really good prompts right now at the Church History Department to get more into people's actual experiences, not just kind of shape their narratives into like, what callings did you hold, blah, blah, blah. One thing that comes to mind is something that my doctoral advisor told me. She said, when you're talking to old ladies, always ask them about their wedding dress.
That's fascinating.
So the point is, if you ask someone like this grand question, like, tell me about the formative experiences of your life, like that never, it doesn't go in the same, like, it doesn't provide the richness of something where you ask someone to describe like a thing, a material, an object that was really important to them. I think Kate's work, you know, on food and to some extent material culture, like really kind of pushed in this direction, excavating the richness of people's lives by looking at things, not just like, you know,
Beliefs.
what did you learn? What's the moral of the story? You know, like, yeah, so I would say ask about really detailed things that people love And that's like a beginning. Kate wanted to, this is very funny. So we had this like brainstorming session in the church history department about like the kinds of books that we wanted to write next. And we were like thinking like mission history, global histories. And Kate's like, I want to write a book that's like about like a serving dish, you know, like in every different culture, like in different cultures, like an object for serving food. And like, you know, we just like write about these different objects, and all of us were like, oh, okay. How are you gonna do that? You know, but like she was really excited about this. She was like, the serving dish book. I'm like, how do we market this, Kate? Like serving dishes. But like she was really into that for that very reason, I think, because like material things that are shaped by people's hands, often women's hands, like have a lot of resonance and kind of pick up the lives, you know, the things in everyday life. But what do you think?
No, I think everything you said, those are wonderful examples. The other thing, I mean, I think about this in the emergency room sometimes when I have time, because you know, going to the emergency room is my job, but for every patient that I encounter there, every person, it's an event for them, right? And so
Like a catastrophe.
yeah, sometimes, you know, major or minor, small or large, but sometimes when I have time, I'll say, you know, and how has that affected you? Or how, you know, what will the ramifications of this be in your life, you know, and then the story starts to unfold. I wish I had more time to do that.
Is there on this global history project? I mean, people could just go in and, I mean, write and offer things, or are they just doing it from one direction?
Well, you're so prescient because we're going to have the global history competition.
Ooh.
It's like the international art competition, but for history.
Wow.
But we're piloting it right now in 2 areas that are not North America. But yeah, eventually there's going to be like it'll be like a festival, a storytelling festival where everyone can submit their stories. And yeah, we're hoping that will help us to have a more bottom-up approach to the saints' stories, and it won't be like the Salt Lake people handing the people in Switzerland their history. Here, we wrote your history for you. Or it can be people like writing their own histories, and we'll have more perspectives. We'll have more reviewers, so like email us and say, you know, you just published this 5 minutes ago and it's totally wrong. Like that would be great. Yeah, because right now we just don't know, you know, if the stuff that we're saying is totally wrong. I sent the Brazil global history to this a scholar who I just learned of, Fernando Pinheiro, and in Brazil, and he like instantly wrote me back and was like, yes, I can already see several mistakes. And I was like, great, you know, like we don't know if we don't know. So hopefully that will work.
Nice. Yes, sir, Rick.
Oh, yes. Well, this is just a general comment. I've always been somewhat disconnected as far as my relationship with people, so I've tended to be more attracted to literature and things like that. But one area that I've always sort of struggled with is you always think, well, I'm interested in this topic or this subject or field, what practical applications are, because I think I've grown up in the faith. There's always this idea of you need the practical knowledge, like how do you fix a tire? You know, how are you going to help somebody if you don't know anything about fixing cars or plumbing or something like that? And I've always admired people who have those skills, and instead I'm always just sort of learning practical things. But I thought that one thing that interested me was for a long time was, well, how does this, I'm studying about another faith, what aspects of the gospel do I find in this other faith? And lately I've come to another conclusion, maybe I just need to study someone's faith and not worry about cherry picking things, not worry about what is similar to what I believe or not, but just appreciate it by itself, because I'm going to be interacting with other people, other faiths, and I just need to appreciate people for what they believe or what they think, whether or not it agrees with me. And I believe that to me is just, maybe that's what it's all about. I think in life we think about, my thoughts and prayers, well, what do we learn as spirits? And then what do we learn as people? What's most important? Life is short. What is it, the most important things to know? And I believe it's the interaction with other people.
Yeah, thanks for that lovely comment. I listened to your comment as I looked at this bouquet of flowers, and I think in some people's mind, like if this were the world and like the Mormons win. Like, let's say this is the Mormons win. Their dream is like a whole bouquet of this. Duh. But like, yeah, that sounds not very fun.
Very beautiful. We have, so, I picture these, so like if you'd had in your head, you would want to address the first presidency of the prophet with some questions. You have an opportunity that I think is even better tonight to hear beautiful wisdom from these two. So whatever heartfelt questions you have, please.
Gee, I'm not sure about that one saucer gardening and medical metaphors.
I agree.
I'm curious. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I have sort of a half-formed question about just with all these women's different experiences and all the trials that they've been through and the 6 years of cancers that you've had to deal with. For me, I feel like before bad things really started happening to me, I was okay with the idea that God caused bad things. And then I got diagnosed with cancer and I thought, this feels like a fluke. I don't think God makes cancer. I think he made biology, and I think biology is random and cruel. And I've been sort of wondering about this idea of whether does God have any control about outcome? Do we just pray to get to know God? Why would I even pray to be in remission if it does nothing? And sort of wondering to myself, is it the case that, because I don't think my faith can afford to be outcome based at this point. I lost my mom and 10 days later I was diagnosed with cancer. Definitely not. And for most people, definitely not. We all have really hard things that we've been through. But it feels really scary to think that God has no control over my life. And just after having 2 really hard things happen to me all at once, I got really scared about the rest of my life and what bad things could happen to me. And I wanted to be able to rely on the idea that God is protecting me. But also, does he make cancer? Does he make these bad things? So curious about your perspectives and maybe some perspectives in the book of having been through a wide variety of experiences, some hard, some good. What is God's role in outcome and control of our lives? Is he only a spectator? Is he sometimes an orchestrator? That's my question.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And like, as you know, as a fellow cancer person, I have the same questions basically all the time. And if you look at, read some of the essays in the book, like there's a story that Elizabeth Hammond tells where her sister was in this coma. The doctors, she had some horrible accident, she's in a coma, the doctor said, sorry, she's gonna die. And then Harold Bailey came and gave her a blessing and said, she's gonna recover. And it took a while for her to recover, but she did. And then on the, so that one, you could say at least, maybe you wouldn't say Harold Bailey healed her, because that's not what he said, but you say, like, well, God knows what's going to happen. And like God like comforted the family, and God made sure that they didn't make any drastic medical decisions, like pulling the plug on her or something like that, because they thought that she would never live with her. And then you look at Emily Bates. Have you read her essay? Emily's on this call actually. So Emily, I'm just quoting your essay. So in Emily Bates' essay, she says, I don't think that, I'm a scientist, I don't think that's how God works. Once like a biological process stops, like the biological process does what the biological process does. But I think what God gives us is, shoot, Emily, what did you say God gives us?
I can speak to that. So that is,
turn Emily around, and then I have something to add beyond the scientific perspective with Emily.
So I'll say, this was my very question. I think as a teenager, I had something very, very much less serious than cancer. But I did have some extreme pain that happened periodically with these migraine headaches that took my vision and made me vomit pretty uncontrollably for a whole day. And they happened so randomly, and I couldn't control when they would happen. And so sometimes it would be on the day of a really important exam or a race. I was a runner, and I still am a runner, but I'm not a racer anymore. And I felt like I use my time so well, and I keep the word of wisdom militantly, probably too militantly. And so I've been promised health through this, through this word of wisdom, right? If I keep the word of wisdom, then the promise is health. And so it made me really question the existence of God, that I wasn't healed. And I think it was actually through reading a novel that I came to this and through my own experience, and then my scientific career, that I started really believing that God supports us through our trials. And he helps us learn through he and she, I should say, because I really believe that they are they. That they help us to learn through these experiences, but I don't believe that anything bad comes from God. I don't believe that cancer could come from God. There's just no way that something so painful and awful would afflict Melissa and Kate and you if it came from God. I cannot believe that a loving being, that loving parents would send something painful and terrible. And so I don't believe that. But I do believe that I can call upon them for support and to feel the love. And I feel that love and support can sometimes, and hope and faith can sometimes tweak the system a little bit. Both Kate and Melissa have lived far longer, Kate, than they were expected to, right? Like Melissa's still thriving. And I am so grateful for that. And I absolutely believe that her faith has extended that time. And I believe that our hope and our and the word of wisdom all give us the best case scenario for this messed up biology that is like happening in all of us, right? Like there are things that are just randomly happening that are wrong, that aren't how they're supposed to happen, and that's part of biology. But I also think that the way that we think and the way that we act informs that, and it changes it slightly, right? And so God is there in that, right? We do have a recipe for giving us the best case outcome with the biology that we have. But we also have genetic propensity towards cancer, towards migraines, towards depression, towards all sorts of different things, right? And we all come with this different package that can be tweaked a little bit by our experience. And so that's, I guess, how I see it. Whether or not that's exactly right, I don't know, but that's how my faith is.
One of Kate's favorite blessings from a church leader she really admired, he rebuked the cancer, didn't promise it would go away, but he rebuked it. And she really loved that image of that soulful divine defiance of this seemingly inexorable misery of accidental biology.
That's beautiful, Emily. Thank you.
Thanks.
I just had I was gonna say I had the same experiences dealing with you, and I was like in the National Institute of Health, having just had this like chest surgery to like remove a chunk of flesh. And the chaplain came by and I asked all these questions, like, does God have agency, or is God just stuck with this crummy world just like us? And he was like trying to comfort me, but I kept on like shredding all of his faith promoting arguments. Oh, in the scriptures, Jesus heals people. And like, yeah, scriptures that were like curated by a bunch of patriarchs who like can't believe that slavery was okay. And it's like, but so I think sometimes it is possible for us to kind of like, we get into these places where like everything's dumb and nothing works. But at other times, there's like times where like we can kind of use the model to make things work. So for example, at another time at NIH, I spent so much time there, it's like my second home. I was about to have all of my immune system totally wiped out by this really hardcore chemotherapy. And I was just like sitting there thinking, that's an incredibly depressing thought. It's like erasing your whole like life history, like your whole cellular identity, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, gee, that's really sad. What do I do about the sadness? I'm gonna have a religious ritual. And so then I like created this religious ritual where the chaplain came in and we like said goodbye to my old selves and we like hailed the new selves and we read scripture, and it changed that experience so fundamentally into like it was like a moment of rejoicing, and it was touching, as opposed to like I'm just sitting here waiting for this horrible chemical to like destroy my identity. Yeah. And then another time, this is not my own doing, I was also at the NIH, and I feel like God came to me and like just like laid a hand on me. And this is the best part. And during that whole visit, I had high blood pressure, but like that morning when I woke up, having had this incredible experience in the night, I had like my one low blood pressure, like normal blood pressure reading. I feel that was God throwing a bone to Melissa's like rationalistic self, being like, no, something was different. You didn't make that up. Something was different, and it changed something in you physically. So sometimes I feel like God throws us a bone. Now that feels really sad, like you're falling off a like 88-story cliff. And like at like story 56, you have this really peaceful experience. I keep on falling. That's really hard. That's funny. But anyway, I think Emily answered that biological question really well. I just want to let you know I feel the same.
Yeah, we had a birthday party for me when I got my new cells.
Birthday.
Yeah.
Right?
Is that another one of Kate's children that said this?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Essentially. Julia?
So I kind of have the same perspective that you all have. I would say probably one of Julia, my perspective. 16 years ago, I had a stillborn baby. I'm okay, really. And that was the first time in my life that I was encountered with something that was terrible. And I was angry at God for like a second, but then I realized if I was angry at him for taking my son, right, like whatever that is, then I would have to be equally angry with him for creating him in the first place. And that's when I came to realize that that's not what our heavenly parents do. That's just not what they do, because me and my spouse's parents, that's not what we do. And realizing that it was like 3 days after we lost him, we had this experience in our home similar where the Lord was in our home. And I had said many a prayer, begging and pleading to see my son one last time. And that prayer was answered with that spirit in my home. And both my husband and I felt it very strongly. And then when it was gone, we also felt it very strongly. So, you know, you just want to blame things like I remember for so long, and it drove my husband crazy. Finally, after 6 months, he's like, I can't do this anymore. What I did wrong. What did I do wrong that caused XYZ to happen? And drove myself nearly insane doing it. But I think finding something better to replace that with, just like, you know, the rituals, people, to replace those thoughts and those feelings. That's where God is. God is in those things. Really, for me, it was God's in the people.
Well, Sam, what are you doing sneaking out? We are past time. We take maybe one more question. I didn't look over here, sorry. You had something.
Yeah.
You know this one.
I was curious, one, I'll just say thank you. And thank everybody, or it's just been very just women, that's whatever this was. I have 3 little girls and just like, this is a place they can grow up great. This kind of, whatever this is. The question I had was a little more intellectual than that. You touched a lot on diversity, and let's actually watch the thing you gave, or I don't know when it was, but we talked about diversity. I think you talked about a lot for biodiversity, those things, and I thought, and Marion, you were talking about early on, you have, you know, there was at least 3, maybe more different stories you could write about. This diversity we have in ourselves is what was my sort of my question, is like how, like, I don't have a words no good right now, but like I feel there's something there, like how do you what's the question? How do you deal with those kinds of things? You know, the idiosyncrasies in ourselves, these things that you know, the wheat and the tares. And how do you balance that? And maybe that's like, it needs to be that way. It needs to, both of those things need to be present. Sort of in the wider community, but also in ourselves, you know, our own ways that we're idiosyncratic inside ourselves. I don't know. That's just a thought I had as a big thing around.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was remembering that years ago when I lived in Boston, there was this really lovely woman who had, I guess, what we now call dissociative identity disorder, or years ago called multiple personality disorder. And like the common kind of stereotype when we think about therapy for that is you try and bring all these parts together into one person, but this, you know, into one kind of personality. But this woman, had, together with her therapist, had decided that that was an act of violence and that she had suffered enough and that she wanted to live in this kind of multiplicity. And it was fascinating to be around her. And I really came to respect that, and it probably kind of liberated me, because like I'm all those things. Like I'm the faithful daughter. I can't tell you how grateful I am for the example of, you know, Mormon in the Book of Mormon. And I can't tell you how wounded I've been by other parts of, you know, my gospel upbringing. And sometimes like I get into this dualistic thinking and I feel like, oh, it must be one or the other, but that feels like the loss of part of me. And maybe the conversation is the important part. Like what, how does this dichotomy, you know, teach me about how to live my life? You know, my daughter was at FSY last week, and she texted me at one point, like, because somebody said, a really well-intentioned, young 20-something counselor said something to her that basically wiped out our whole family, single parents, divorce. And I just texted her back and I said, like, this guy's wrong, you don't have to believe that. She said, we had this little conversation back and forth, and then she texted me in all caps, then what are we doing in this church? And my text, and it was like the voice of truth, right? And I texted her back and I said, I've been thinking the same question ever since, you texted me about what happened. And and what's that thing? Oh my goodness, Rilke, Letters to the Young Poet or the Young Artist, that thing about loving the questions, like you don't have to have the answers. And I think I like that I'm a questioning person. I like that I doubt and I also have faith. I like that, I can, put in a chest tube and weep when I read a poem, right? Like we all have all of those things, right? I'm just naming the ones that are true for me. Right. And I think, Melissa, all the suffering you've had and all the goodness you created in the world, you must, anyway, I don't want to speak for you, but there all these dichotomies. Yeah, no. Yeah.
I'd also say, one of the things that my grandpa, one of the,
1 second, because I think he was going to follow up, and then it's you.
I would say, it sounds like part of it for you is just, in some ways, living with the ambiguity and making peace with these things. Not necessarily trying to reconcile them, just those things exist as that.
Yeah, and I feel like there are days that they feel reconciled one way or the other, and that feels kind of peaceful, but most of the time, I'm living in that muddy middle, and I think I'm probably better for it. I'm better for every time my heart's been broken. I'm better for every time I felt triumphant. I'm better for every time I've known what I was doing. I'm better for every time I didn't. I think that's how we work out whatever we do. Emily.
yes, I agree with what you're saying. I really, that resonates with me. One thing that my grandpa was he wrote the church presidency quite frequently. And he had major questions he was completely devoted to the church, but he wrote the first presidency about Black people not having the priesthood and about women not having voices, in the 50s and in the 60s and in the 70s. And I guess at one point, one of his children, one of my uncles asked them, why are you still in this when you care so much about these things that are not seeming to change, and he said, because a stone that's in a river changes its course, but once you get out of the river, you don't change the course anymore. And so I guess I feel like, I feel like that's part of why it's important to to try and, all of our perspectives are part of it. We are the church, and our experiences are varied, and our perspectives influence the way that the river is flowing, the way that the stream goes, even if it's slowly. Maybe that answers something. I thought.
Great comment. Thank you. Well, I think we need to wrap up so Janet can have her phone back. Yeah, get this back. Thank you so much. Did you have any final wrap up or anything you have not said that you wanted to say? You good?
Set it up.
Yeah.
So great.
I just felt like this was such a gift tonight. I mean, seriously, I have a bit of anxiousness every month when I do this. I don't know how it's going to turn out. And everybody's comments, questions.
Ambiguity.
Yeah, I'm living with ambiguity. I mean, this was just such a gorgeous night because of the to have Sam here, you know, the widow of Kate, and it's two girls and they're beautiful questions. You know, I mean, we could have gathered and talked about our favorite vacations, but what made this evening so like, what you couldn't say what it was, right? You couldn't quite say what this was really all the pain that you all carry a bit with you, and trying to figure out how to navigate that pain, and then also the faith and joy that you've experienced journeying through that pain. And I feel so honored that you would share that, come and share that tonight. So thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, it was a sacrifice, you know, personal of you. So I sure appreciate it. Let's see. We did have Spencer. You were amazing. Peter Reinhold's here too, and I don't know if you guys want to do something together, but your favorite hymn was, say it again.
My favorite cancer, chemo.
Your favorite chemo hymn was
Now let us
Now Let Us Rejoice.
rejoice.
Do you want to try to lead us in that? Would you do that? And you guys can sing together. And one of the things I love is that, you know, I asked Spencer, a man, we're trying as men to be of support to you amazing women. Trying to turn the wheels a little bit around here that we've usually done. So anyway, let's do that. And then Emily, would you feel comfortable giving us whatever prayer comes to your heart?
Sure.
Thank you. And you, as you know, as you've attended before, you can address Heavenly Parents or however you want to do it. Okay. And we usually sing a cappella, but we could do guitar. But yeah, you can do it however you want.
No, it's okay.
Oh, what page is it?
Three. An interesting little fact about this song, and maybe you all know this, but in the old days, the early days, the church, they'd say, we're going to sing Now Let Us Rejoice to the tune of, and they'd name some song often, and they were contemporary songs. And so I think it was in the dedication of the Kirtland Temple, they said, I think they sang Spirit of, let's see, this one in the Spirit of God.
To different tunes than these.
You can do, you can swap this music and the lyrics to those two songs. And they used to do that. And it's, I think Spirit of God is number 2, maybe. They're right next to each other. So
So is that what you want to do?
no, I think Now Let Us Rejoice. It is typical to comfort. So we'll stick to the version. Yeah.
The Spirit of God is so high and it feels.
It's kind of tunes and you can keep with it. So I'm just gonna throw out a key and hope that we get it. So now let us rejoice in the day of salvation. No longer strangers on the TV road. Good tidings are sending to us and nation and surely out. We
Our dear Heavenly Father, we're grateful for the expansion that our brains and our hearts have felt here tonight, and we're grateful for those who dedicated their time to make it possible. Please help us to remember the things that we have felt and to use them to connect with others and to love others. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Beautiful.